road. So hey, I'm Bill Banham. I'm one of the co-hosts of InnovateWork. InnovateWork started in early 2017 on a cold winter's night in downtown Toronto. It was co-founded by myself and the wonderful Rob Catalano. Unfortunately, Rob is doing another webinar right now. Can you believe that? And since then, we've grown into an online and in-person global community of HR, talent, tech, and leaders. So we now host either virtual events right now, of course, or in-person events when we can, in places like Montreal, Toronto, Sydney, Australia, Vancouver, and this is our first event, which the host city, shall we call it that, is Calgary, but it's for an audience all across mountain time. And the mission of InnovateWork is to bring a bunch of really cool kids together and to share ideas, to learn from each other, and to network. And there are three principles behind that, which are to educate, and my goodness me, we've got some really fantastic speakers for you today, to engage and to share those ideas, and to inspire you to leave our sessions with new approaches and new practices to improve the ways that you work at your company. So that's part of the introduction already done. I'm going to tell you a bit about my co-host in just a second. Following that, Rob will jump on and say hi to everybody, and then we'll get into our 5 passion series talks. Each one is 9 minutes, so that's quite a challenge, and it's going to tackle a completely different topic every time, geared towards you, pros in HR, talent, tech, operations, finance, and leadership. And then after the 5 sessions, we're going to have around about 30 minutes for a Q&A, which Rob is going to lead. So just a couple of procedural things here. We do encourage you all to ask questions of our speakers, and then towards the end there will be that 30-minute or so session where they'll answer those. So you can do that by clicking on the Q&A button as opposed to the chat button. Okay, so please show your support for each of the sessions, but if you've got questions for our speakers, save them, throw them into the Q&A, and Rob will read those off at that part of the webinar today. Just one other thing to note is you can change how you view your speakers, so you can have a whole bunch of speakers on the screen at one time, or indeed you can change it so you just see the one particular presenter. Okay, and this event today is brought to you by the HR Gazette and Work Tango. The hashtag is InnovateWork. Please do spread the love. Our speakers today are, well, we've got a pretty fine lineup, I think. Some pretty impressive people. We've got Mary Faulkner, Stephen Shedletzky, Jackye Clayton, Serge Boudreau, and Michael Moon. Before we do get into the sessions, I just want to pass over now to Rob Caswell. Rob is the co-host today, and he's going to be leading the charge on the go forward for the new Rockies chapter of InnovateWork. Rob, over to you.
Great, thanks, Bill, and welcome everyone who has joined us today. Lots of folks from Calgary, a couple of my own team members, and I did not pay them to be here, but they're here, and I enjoy that, and some familiar names, and people all the way as far from, I think the furthest away is Christine here from Venezuela dialing in. So as Bill mentioned, my name is Rob Caswell. I'm co-hosting InnovateWork Rockies. We couldn't let Toronto and the UK have all the fun out here. In my day job, I'm the manager of employee and labor relations for Care West Innovative Healthcare. We're a public continuing care sector. And this is our first Rockies event. We already have a date set for our second virtual engagement on November 26th. So if you enjoy this event, please mark your calendar for that one as well. And we'll be looking forward to when the stars align and we're able to start hosting in-person events and have our first in-person event in Calgary and supporting all us fine folks that hang out in the mountain time zone here. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Michael M. Moon, PhD. Michael Moon is an organizational psychologist and people analytics expert who specializes in applying analytics and evidence-based approaches to the management of people. Michael has 20 years of experience working in HR, OD, and HR technology, as well as an HCM analyst and researcher for I4CP and research director of HCM for Aberdeen Group. She currently works at ADP as a director, HCM knowledge consulting for ADP Data Cloud, where she leads a team of subject matter experts and consultants who help clients use their data to make more effective people decision and assist in the development of ADP Data Cloud as an analytics tool. Michael is a highly sought speaker and conducts organizational research on a range of topics, including organizational culture, turnover, social capital, people analytics, organizational network analysis, employee engagement, experience, and well-being. In the fall, she'll be joining Columbia University as an associate, teaching in their master's in HCM program. Michael earned her PhD in human capital management from Bellevue University and her MS in human resources from Suffolk University. In 2019, she was named one of the top 100 HR tech influencers of 2019 by Human Resources Executive. Very pleased to introduce our first speaker, Michael Moon.
Thank you very much, Rob, and thank you, Bill, for inviting me as well. And thank you all who are attending today. So if you bear with me, I'm just going to go ahead and pull up my slides and we shall get the show started. All right. Okay. So today my talk, and I know we have 9 minutes, so I'm going to really work on being brief. I really want to talk with you today about the role of people analytics and why, based on things that are happening around us, why we have no choice as leaders, as HR leaders, as leaders inside of our organizations to actually move the needle and say, people analytics is no longer this nice thing that we can do. Eventually we'll get it off our list, but we must start thinking about the fact that we have a lot of things happening in the workforce and we have no choice but to really think about the way in which we're going to help our people. So with the rest of the world, we watched in disbelief as the COVID-19 pandemic took hold at the beginning of 2020 and changed life as we knew it. We've seen, and even before this, we've seen the speed and scale of change continue to accelerate with technological advances bringing bigger and bolder changes in shorter windows of time. We are in a hyper-VUCA world. We're seeing the acceleration of pre-existing disruptions. Interruptions have become normalized, so hopefully my cat will not come walking through, one of my two cats, right? But we all expect that now. It's like, you know, we're all dealing with the same thing. But by now in America, everyone has become keenly aware that there is more than just one pandemic affecting US lives and local economies. On May 26, 2020, the world watched in horror as the brutal killing of George Floyd, an unarmed Black man, streamed across our TVs and devices. Since then, even before May 26, videos of violence and reports of racist threats against Black and Indigenous people of color in America have flooded social media and news channels. Research shows that how organizations choose to respond, especially those that get widespread media coverage, can either help their employees feel psychologically safe or contribute to racial identity threat and their mistrust of institutions. The challenges that organizations face today reach far beyond the marginalization of underrepresented employees in the workplace, and conventional approaches to DE&I will simply not cut it. When we talk about people analytics, we're all very familiar or should be familiar with the concept of hindsight, right? Using data to look backwards to understand what happened, when did it happen. So we're characterizing, kind of looking laggard data and in hopes to be able to then derive insight. So let's understand better why it happened. Maybe how do two things relate to each other? And maybe that'll help us figure out what we need to do differently or better, right? And then, about 10 years ago, the buzzword predictive analytics, right? The ability to kind of then use that data to potentially predict what might happen in the future. And I love the graphic here because we think about the different ways we're in a car, right? Okay, great. We've got our rear view mirror to see the past. We've got the GPS to see the future. We've got our instrument panel here that could potentially help us understand why is the car making that sound or why is it going so slow. But what we don't focus on in organizations, and especially we have not turned our attention to as much, is something I call now sight. This is the imperative for organizations, and this is why people analytics is so important. NowSide is about us taking the time to understand how people are thinking and feeling right now, and being able to adapt and adjust to their needs to help ensure that they are able to work in a safe environment. Let's move to the next slide. Right, so when we think about the impact of COVID-19, I'll talk a little about analytics and some of the ways in which organizations should be thinking about using data and metrics. Right? So as organizations tried to quickly respond and react to the growing impact of COVID-19 on both their workers and the organization, there was an immediate need to take stock of how best to react to the pandemic. Right? So we started seeing requests come in for simply understanding, where are my people, right? How many of them actually don't have emergency contacts? Right? So we're looking at really descriptive statistics here, basic understanding, so that we can assure and better prepare, right, for understanding the state of the workforce. And as we start to see organizations try to return to some sort of, I hate the word normal, but say normalcy, right, by bringing people back to the office and or just transitioning to an all remote workforce, we really need to think about the way in which we apply a data-driven approach to better understand workers, better understand the different attributes, needs, and dimensions, and be able to segment the workforce. And if organizations can better understand their workers, they'll be able to more effectively develop targeted programs and policies that bring out workers' personal best while affording them the health protections that they need. Right? So in the re-engage, we need to be thinking about not only, all right, let's get everybody together, let's get them on board, but we need to spend the time to understand who can actually return, who wants to return, and where's that intersection. And using data and surveys, right, we can actually identify who those people are and then start to target specific programs and initiatives to help re-engage that workforce. So for example, identify somebody that wants to return, but they can't, and we spend the time, we understand that for the majority of those people in that quadrant, it has to do with the fact that they don't have childcare. So maybe there's something the company can do to help do that, to help support that. Right? And then last thing, when we think about once we start to get more people in the workplace, even if we don't, right, it's really started to think about how do we reimagine, right, and how does data help us reimagine what the future of the organization will be. So using ONA and trying to help understand how people are connected and why they're connecting, right, to better understand how do we help facilitate these virtual relationships that may never have, especially people that just joined your organization, right, they haven't had the benefit of meeting people in the office. So what can we learn, right, from how people are interacting to help there? From recombining, reskilling, redeploying, being able to identify those skills that are most needed, identify the skills that exist in people, and quickly redeploy people where maybe you may have a certain part of your business that's just not, it's because it's been significantly impacted by COVID, but maybe you have an opportunity to put them in another part of the organization. So how do you do that? And then lastly, it's about measuring productivity the right way. And what I mean by that is we've seen a lot, we knew this was happening before, but now we're seeing more of these articles about companies using surveillance and monitoring software, because that's the only way they think they'll be able to properly measure whether or not you're being productive or not. And so we have to think beyond, right, the fact that being at home means you're not as productive. In fact, I've done research of my own that shows that's not the fact. And so what we need to start to think is, how do we measure productivity? By maybe tracking the number of projects completed, the number of tasks completed, the number of goals achieved, rather than the number of hours that you're spending sitting in front of your computer each day. And then when we talk about diversity and inclusion, right, we have primarily been focused on diversity, thinking about it in terms of similarities and differences in the workplace, and focus on age, gender, and ethnicity. Right? We not need to extend that beyond just those traditional ways of thinking about diversity and beyond just simply counting the numbers of people. And if we think about the difference between diversity and inclusion, my favorite quote is, diversity is being invited to the dance, and inclusion is actually being asked to dance, right? So it's how organizations take and capitalize on the diversity that they have within the organization, but also where they actually seek out, value, and use the knowledge and experiences of diverse employees. So if we think about some of the ways in which we can actually analytics applies to this, right? So let's expand how we define, right? So let's stop thinking about measuring that in boxes that we have to report on because it's for compliance reasons. So if in the US, right, EEO1, so let's expand those. Even if our systems don't allow us, let's demand from our vendors that they do. Right. Also thinking about the intersectionality, right, of gender and race and ethnicity, for example. And we look at the chart over here, one could say, look, it looks good. It looks like we're doing pretty good with but when you actually overlay the two together, now you see the hotspots where there actually is more of a problem in terms of your representation of employees based on a combination of race and ethnicity. Right, we can start to think about, again, everyone knows I'm the O&A geek, so measuring levels of heterogeneity, so the level of similarity, the differences within a network, and then overlaying that with outcomes that matter. So, and then analyzing people processes to identify potential biases. So if we think about, we know there's research that says that employee referrals, right, we're more likely to refer people who are like us, right? So if my organization is already not diverse, right, and I'm more likely to refer someone that's similar to me, right? So we can use data, right, to better understand, is that actually happening in our organization? Right? And then we can start to think about how do we address that. And then from an inclusion standpoint, right, again, we know we've been measuring it through surveys, right, but there are other ways to get at understanding inclusion, looking at other metrics that you could potentially use. This internal-external hiring ratio is an example of looking at the percentage of hires that you hire internally versus externally, right? And again, if you have a problem with diversity and you're hiring more internally than externally, right, then again, you're just perpetuating, right? Measuring the flow of talent across the organization, looking at gender and looking at how they flow through their careers or from department to department. Those are the things that we can start to see how we're using that diversity as a positive in the organization and giving people an opportunity to be heard, to feel like they can have a voice, bring themselves to work and be a part, authentic self to work and be a part of decision making. And so lastly, I'm going to wrap up. I don't know where I am with time, but I'm going to try. I spoke really fast, but it's a couple of things here. When we think about people analytics, we're not just metrics anymore, right? We're not just counts. We're not just percentage. We're just ratios. We have an opportunity and a call really to do a better job at helping our organizations understand and take the temperature of the workforce so that we can do the right thing for them. We need to be able to start to move from reactivity to proactivity, which is something that I think most organizations aren't very good at anyway, right? And people analytics can help with that, embarking on a more internal proactive analysis to help create remedies that employees need now. Right? We're looking at think about embedding analytics in processes as opposed to let's build analytics after we've designed a process. Use the analytics to help you decide what the process should be. Right? To being able to eliminate and mitigate bias. We talked about that in some of the prior slides. So people analytics, especially when accompanied by evidence-based approaches, can help diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging programs by identifying and potentially removing some of the bias that's happening in decision making. 2 more points. What you really need, don't tell anybody else I said this, or maybe you should. You don't need a data scientist, right? What you really need are individuals that truly understand what motivates people in the workplace, who have the ability to be empathetic and have advanced Excel skills and can have a little bit of analytical thinking, but you don't have to be a programmer to start in people analytics and to start actually making a difference and connecting the dots within the organization. And last but not least, it's social capital. So not just the human capital measures that are imperative. Again, the graphic here, we're looking at another network analysis, but being able to understand we now more than ever how people are connected, when they're connected is so important for organizations to understand and needs to be a renewed emphasis and focus for people analytics. It is our collective wisdom that exceeds the sum of its parts. And wisdom comes when we are able to recognize and appreciate our differences even more than the similarities, but also come to understand the value of treating each other fairly and equitably to create a more inclusive environment where everyone can flourish. All right, did I do it? Thank you, everyone. I appreciate giving the time. And next, we will move on to our next speaker. So give me a moment. I'll pull up her bio and introduce Jackye Clayton. Apologies, my web browser closed.
It's okay. If you want, I can introduce myself. It's probably easier.
I'm almost there. I'm almost there, Jackye. I'm so sorry.
All right.
I feel like I just killed you. All right. All right. So I owe you one. All right. So Jackye Clayton, she's the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belonging Data Management Consultant. She has acclaimed expertise in diversity and inclusion, recruitment technology, and a global network of nonprofit human resource and recruiting professionals. Jackye is a servant leader, uniquely inspirational speaker, and a revered thought leader. Jackye was named one of the 9 powerful women in business you should know by SDHR Consulting, one of the 15 women in HR tech to follow in 2019 by VidCruiter, 2019 top 100 list of human resource influencers by HR Executive Magazine, and one of the top recruitment thought leaders that you must follow in 2019 by Interview Mocha Magazine. With that, I will turn it over to you, Jackye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Hi, guys. I'm Jackye Clayton. Can everybody see my screen? I'm going to make it big. I just shortened it. I think you can see it okay. But I'm just kind of taking what Michael said, and we're taking it to a little bit of a different piece. It's the data diversity dilemma. Now, if you look at this picture, this is my last environment when I first started. A lot of things have changed. When you're looking at it at first, you might not notice anything different. Looks like a typical work environment, right? But as you dig in a little bit further, you might notice that one of these things is not like the others. And the other part, when we're looking at it, why do we have this data dilemma? Well, we all try to set out to find out, and we notice some things. One of them is the collection of data. We've been doing this for a long time. We've talked about big data for years. And we've been looking at it the same way, even though technology has changed so much. But for some reason, what we do with it hasn't changed at all. This is from Amazon. This is looking at their EEO1 that they had published. And if you look at it, it looks like we have some balance here, maybe a different piece there. And some of the data is really good. But did you notice anything about this? Why is it so skewed? If we have an equal balance or close to an equal balance of women to men, why then do we not have that in the management space? Why do we have that piece and then look at the other colors? The colors that were chosen to show you the data wasn't on purpose or was on purpose. Don't think that for 1 second that this wasn't chosen to be represented in this way to make you feel like it's more balanced. Like, oh, look, 2 or more raises. Look at this piece. But what can we really learn from this? I don't think this is a big shocker. Maybe it was shocked on the one end. I was shocked that there were as many women as there was. But what are we getting from this? We have to start thinking about what we're collecting and what we're asking and what we're reporting on. The next thing I want to go into is the KPIs. This is a dashboard from a product that you might be familiar with, and it looks at precisely, this is just a standard applicant 1, applicant 2, how many were hired, how many rejected. These are some standards. But if we're going to even the playing field and bring equity to the piece, then we have to look at this in a different way. How many of these applicants were women? How many of these applicants were more than likely, underrepresented? Do we have any information? Is there ways of gathering that information? How many of these were rejected? And then we have to take it to another step. The concern is, if we're trying to have a different standard and equality effort for diversity and inclusion, then this is just not going to work. We can't look at time to hire, because we want recruiters to not be held by how fast they were able to do it, but the types of qualities they were able to get, the types of candidates they were recruiting into the system. Next, you can look at things like applicants received by source. Are you investing in places where people are looking? Are you looking at what is the best, where you're getting the best candidates? Where are you getting those diverse candidates? For those of you that are posting on sites that are directly optioned towards women or people of color, I bet you'll find that you will get more diverse candidates from your standard Indeed, Career Builder, and Monster, et cetera. The other part is when you're looking at the offer acceptance ratio. Is it enough just to look at the offer acceptance ratio? What about offers accepted by women versus men, or people that are underrepresented versus those that are in the majority? We also have to look at that and break it down even further. The turnover. This is a turnover. Looking at this is from People Insight. In general, people look at turnover, and the recruiting piece is just not even thought of. Exit interviews kind of gotten to be old. Succession planning, people haven't done that as much. But we have to look at turnover a different way. If we're trying to equal the playing field, it's not enough to just say, oh, we lost these people. Look at these examples here for this report. You can see when they're looking, this is just the turnover report. Look at the turnover by gender. So we can look at the ones versus female versus male. Are we noticing anything of their turnover by ethnicity? So I was looking at the hires of ethnicity versus the turnover by ethnicity. We might have something a little bit deeper that we need to look at. So what's the dilemma? The dilemma is, this is kind of the golden ticket. This is the feel-good, nice stuff that everybody likes to talk about. We're retaining the best talent. We're driving innovation because we have this diverse team. We want people to feel included. We want people to be heard. You heard earlier when Michael said it's about one, diversity is being asked to the party, and then inclusion is being asked to the dance. But I want belonging. I want to know that the music that I like to listen to is going to be played there, that we've taken the time to find out our audience. We know who we're working with so that we can make sure people feel that they belong, not just that they were just brought in just for bringing in that sake. And the other part is representation other places. This is something that when I was looking at this, where people are looking at strategies for diverse pipelines, that made me, I cringed a little bit. One of the things that I can tell you from my standpoint, and this is just personally to me, is that you cannot make me feel less included than by creating something that is just for me and not for everyone. We're trying to build equality. We're trying to make sure that we have level playing field. If you're attending or creating job careers that cater to a diverse population, you could be missing out on top talent. You want to invite everyone and have them in multiple locations. The other part is leveraging networks for referrals. As she mentioned earlier, if you don't have a diverse group and you don't have a diverse work base, you're not going to be able to find those people alone from referral alone. Removing biased language from job descriptions. These are the things that people are looking for, building the diverse pipeline of candidates. But you know what's missing from this list? Talking internally to our diverse populations that work here to find out what they think would make most place. Asking people, do they feel comfortable in this environment? Is this a place where they would like to work? Why aren't they referring their friends? Would they refer their friends to refer this job to an underrepresented group? The issue, what we have to look at is the data, but we have to hold people accountable. It's 100% accountable, 100% of the time, 100% of the process. Look at how many people are applying versus how many people are versus being hired. Where are we losing the diverse candidates? What is the average time for our diverse candidates when they're there? How long are they staying in the positions? And where are they dropping off? You see, I am a firm believer that when you say, for example, Acme Brick, I'll just use Acme Brick as a fake example, and you'll hear reports, Acme Brick has a diversity and inclusion problems, and they'll splatter it. You know, we have this cancel culture, but they'll be splattered all over Twitter, and everyone will talk about how bad it is. But let's get real. The company culture might be there, but it could be perpetuated by certain people in certain areas. Is it that Acme Brick has a problem? Or could it be that Jim in accounting has a problem? Or Stephanie in manufacturing has a problem? It's 100% accountable 100% of the time to look at those numbers and look at the data, who's getting promoted, who's going through the process, and what's happening after they're here. Joe, who I've had the honor to work with on several projects, said this: if you do not intentionally include, you will unintentionally exclude. Some people will say, I don't want to check the boxes. It's not fair to check the boxes. That's not the way we want to do diversity and inclusion. I'm here to tell you, if it takes checking off the boxes, check off the boxes until it gets just normalized and you feel more comfortable and you know exactly what you can do to be able to move it forward. And here's something that I hope that you have the same mantra as I am. I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept. The big piece is we act like this is very complex. As you can tell by this talk that I've given today, it's really not as difficult as we're trying to make it seem. I think people like to feel like they're doing a lot of work, but really, we've been collecting this data for years. We've been bragging about it for years. And so now is the time for us to look forward and find the right people and no longer accept things that we know are wrong. And we need to be able to move forward and look at the data so that we will be able to push it forward into the future, sorry. Thank you for listening. And next, I'm going to introduce to you our next speaker, Serge Boudreau. Serge has spent over 15 years in the recruitment space, including 10 years working for recruitment technology companies. He's held the title of Director for Western Canada for Workopolis at Indeed, and Serge has led recruitment teams for several well-known brands, and he currently holds the title of Director of Talent Acquisition at Robots and Pencils. Serge is the creator and co-host of the popular recruitment-focused podcast, The Recruitment Flex. Take it away, Serge.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your introduction, and thank you for having me. It's really exciting to talk to this group. So when we do an introduction, I always include where I work, but I think it's critical for me to mention as well. My personal introduction quickly is I'm also a father of 3 young kids. So one that's 5 and starting kindergarten in a few weeks, and identical twin daughters that are 1.5 years. So for all the parents listening in, you know how much work that is and the challenge with that. And I'm a husband to a wonderful wife that helps me bring my passion for recruitment in the space that I'm in and helps me at home and is very career driven in itself. So wanted to add that. Yes, I am the Director of Talent Acquisition at a company called Robots and Pencils, have a podcast that I'm passionate. There's a lot of other things, but those are 2 critical elements for me as well. So today, there's a couple things I want to talk about. So I want to talk about 2 philosophies or mantras that I've always had, but in the current company, I've been able to actually execute to the full extent. So one of them is always learning. I'm going to focus here on skill-based hiring. I think it's an interesting topic, and I think it really goes with the times. And also follow the talent. And what I mean here is follow the talent is you can be anywhere and be hired by any company. So I'm going to share my thoughts around that as well. So hopefully there's some good knowledge to share, and hopefully I can bring something that's valuable for you. So I'm going to start with always learning. So if we look at business leaders throughout the times, they really view college as a college degree as a proxy for hard and soft skills. Unfortunately, for that really dramatically decreases the talent pool, and that definitely causes some challenges. So if we look how the internet has really changed the way that we learn and basically everything we do. So to give you a little bit of an idea of that is I'm not handy. My wife and anyone that knows me will attest to that. But I've actually installed my own floor and I built a bookshelf. And how did I do that? I basically Googled it, then watched YouTube videos and followed the instructions and was able to do it. So if we look at how people are learning and how the smartphone has changed with different courses you can take, different skill sets you can learn, it's really changed because the skill cycle is a lot faster than it used to be. So you want to look at the aptitude to acquire skills. I think that is way more critical than it's ever been. So at my present company, we do not have a college degree requirement. Even though we work in the most complicated and innovative type of technology, we really looked in depth as far as what we do and how we do it. And we have people with PhDs, masters, bachelors, and we have a lot of self-taught people that we've brought in. And if I look, correlate basically how well these people are doing, there's not a trend. If we look at the performance of all these people in different skill sets that we have, we're not seeing a skill set based on education, but we are seeing a difference based on how much these people have always been learning, acquiring new skills, taking different courses. And that really relates to how the world of work has changed and how skills is really important. So like to dig in a little bit deeper. So if we look at tech companies have been able to evolve a skill-based hiring for a longer time. But my question and the challenge to everyone that's listening here is, why can't we do it for a lot of roles? Like, let's take the example. So sales and marketing as an example. If we look at, if I'm going to hire a marketing professional and I have two candidates and one maybe got a certificate from a community college and has spent a lot of time getting their Google AdWords certification, their Facebook Blueprint certification, taken different courses on Udemy or whatever the case is, compared to someone that got a degree maybe 20 years ago and has done nothing to enhance their skill. I am going to choose the first option. And if I think of what I did in college is there was a lot of drinking, there's a lot of partying, and I don't remember what I learned. But I do remember what I've learned and throughout my career and all the different courses and all the books that I've read to really enhance those skills. So I think there's an opportunity for a lot of companies to evolve when it comes to how they look at talent and not looking at pedigree or college degree and sometimes even experience. So still a stigma for a lot of different generations that you need a college degree. And I want to challenge that. But let's put in context. You still need a college degree. Like I wouldn't want my surgeon not to have their PhD or whatever the case is. But for a lot of roles, I think we need to take a look at that. And we've been talking a lot about diversity and inclusion. And unfortunately, if you look at the underrepresented groups when it comes to college degrees, minorities are the bigger portion of it. So when you're thinking about your diversity and inclusion strategy, this is definitely something you have to take a look at. Skill-based hiring is definitely, there's challenges, but there's also a lot of opportunity. And this is where for all of us as HR professionals, we do have to take a look at our leaders and have those conversations, in my opinion. So let's really focus on the aptitude to learn new skills more than pedigree and degree is my opinion when we're looking at the whole workforce. The other element that I want to talk about is follow the talent. So I think this is very relevant with everything that's going on with COVID-19. I joined my current company, Robots and Pencils, and they've had this philosophy for a long time. But they really had the philosophy of hiring the best people and basically then getting them to guide where the company is going. So we've been around for 10 years and we've innovated and evolved several times. We started as a games company to an app, and now we focus on healthcare and education. So a company is involved with the talent, but being in talent acquisition and having a strong penchant for marketing, I loved the tagline. So I stole it for talent attraction. And how I relate it is find the best talent wherever they are and hire them. So it really means you can work anywhere and work for us. So this opens a pool of talent that we would not have had access to before. It gives companies that do this a massive competitive edge. Like I'll give you an example of, say you have someone coming from a small town Alberta, since we're so say someone went to college or was self-taught and decided to move back home. In the past, the opportunities for jobs that really matched their skill set was very limited, and sometimes they ended up in jobs that, because of the opportunities in the small towns, wasn't there. We now have, and those people do to work for companies that they never had the opportunity to do before. And companies now have a way more broader talent pool that they can look at. If you look at where they can actually hire these people, how they can acquire. And I have an example, actually have a recruiter for us that just started in Vancouver. Her husband just got recently a new job and she needs to move to Toronto. In the old days, that would mean she would lose her job. And for us, it was great. She could work in Toronto exactly the same. So we all know the benefits of remote working. We know remote workers generally are more productive, they're happier, it promotes diversity of talent, it reduces costs. So for organizations, there's a lot of benefits. But I'm going to put this, that you got to be careful in how you set up. There's still a lot of mentalities out there. And I've heard stories of companies having employees have their Zoom on all day so they can check up on them. If that's your culture, that needs to change to be able to have a real strong culture of remote working and working anywhere. You also need the right technology and you need the right cadence for meetings, making sure that people in the office and outside of the office are treated exactly the same. I'm going to leave on one thing. Most of people on this call are HR professionals, and a lot of the times we're on the back of the bus as far as leading change. This is our opportunity to get on the driver's side of the bus and really create the changes that the organizations need. These are two examples of things that I follow the talent and always learning that I think are critical, but it's for us to lead that change. I'm a big believer that perfection is the enemy of execution. Speed is really important in these days. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Hopefully I brought some knowledge that you didn't have, but I'm happy to answer more questions. But I'm also interested, I am going to introduce our next speaker. So Mary Faulkner. So Mary is a talent strategist and business leader with almost 15 years experience in helping organizations achieve their goals. After working on the operations sides of startups and small company, she is now a senior advisor with IAHR, a consulting firm that helps organizations through business transformation. In addition to her work with companies, Mary authors a leadership development blog, survivingleadership.blog, so check it out, to continue the dialogue around challenge and leadership. both being a leader and being led. Mary is a regular contributor to HR Examiner and ERE.net, and has also written for Churn, Recruiting Daily, and many more. Mary, you're a busy lady, so I'll let you take over.
Yes, busy. I'm not sure how productive I am, but we'll call me busy. So hi, everybody. Excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Wait for it. It's very exciting. Yeah, the anticipation is endless, right? All right, so everybody had some really great slides. This is about as in-depth as my slides get, because what I really want to talk about today is the relationship side of what's happening with the change in the way that work is happening and with remote working, and really focusing on that manager-employee dynamic. And in some ways, you can think about it from a company-worker relationship. Now, this evolution has been underway for a while. I think we've seen it as companies get more and more comfortable with remote work, or even in organizations where you're geographically dispersed. It's not uncommon for managers and employees to not be co-located, but what's going on with the pandemic has really accelerated a lot of the work that needs to be done. Google, Salesforce, other organizations have announced long-term work from home policies. I think Salesforce is through July 31st of next year has been announced. So that's a long time. And workers who are deemed essential, so all of you who had those emergency response plans in place forever, you have your essential workers. Well, now suddenly they are really essential, and they have to go in to a location, whether it's an office, to a job site, to a facility, to provide those services that are deemed essential, but they're really struggling to figure out how are they going to find daycare for their children, or how are they going to juggle all the challenges and while still worrying about the safety on a day-to-day basis. So when I talk about this topic, I really want to be clear. There has been remote working before COVID. There will be remote working after COVID. Essential workers have always had to go to work when other workers did not have to go to work. What is different this time is how quickly it hit, how widespread it is, and the fact that there is no timeline for when this will be, quote, over. So it really falls upon the manager and the employee to come up with a dynamic that's going to work for them long term, because companies can put out policies and there can be legislation out there, but until the manager employee figure out how they're going to work together, it's not going to be any better. So the first one that we have to think about in this new world of working is proximity. So I don't know if you talked to some of your coworkers or some of your friends, and you know that a lot of people were very excited about not having to commute anymore, having the opportunity to work from home, and they were very glad to not be under the eye of their supervisor anymore. The things that they can avoid, which they're very happy about, things like no more drive-bys, like the Lumberg drive-by, like we're going to need you to come in on Saturday. That's not there anymore. You don't have to worry about that last minute interruption as you're packing up to go home for the day. People walking by to just chat about their weekend with you and to interrupt you when you're in the middle of something really, really important. Now people can have a meeting and not have to worry about whether or not they're in their PJs. I look kind of professional from the top up, but I am telling you, I am wearing cutoff shorts underneath, and that's okay. And that's the joy of being able to work remotely. But as time has continued to go on and it's no longer quite as temporary as everybody thought it was going to be, people are starting to see that not being in the same location or not having that proximity can be a challenge. Emails and IMs are not well known for being nuanced. You can't always tell the tone. You can't always tell the intent of what's happening with an IM. When you don't have that co-location, there's less organic interaction that's happening, and that's very exhausting. Zoom fatigue is a real thing. Having to schedule every single interaction that you want to have with one of your coworkers or with your manager can be really exhausting. We can say we have an open door policy, but it's no longer, let me just take a quick peek and see if my manager is available. Now you have to schedule it. Now you have to look at a calendar. So there's some real pros and cons of this lack of proximity in the workplace. And what really, really sticks out in this element is that need for clarity, that importance of clarity, which takes us to our next topic. which is clear expectations. So you might have noticed a theme of Office Space. I am a huge fan. It is required viewing for anyone who works with me. But in Office Space, you know that Joanna was talked to about her flair. That is the buttons and everything she had to wear. She didn't want to talk about her flair. Let's be honest, nobody wants to talk about their flair. They just want to know what it is that you expect them to do, and they will do it. And you shouldn't always assume as a manager that every single employee is super motivated to go above and beyond on a daily basis. We all have off days. We all have fatigue. We all have challenges that we're facing. So if you need your employees to do something specific, tell them that. Don't give a vague outline of what your expectations are and then act disappointed that they didn't do exactly what it is that you wanted them to do. Expectation goes both ways though. Employees have every right and should be giving their expectations back to their managers. If you as an employee are uncertain of what your manager wants you to do, ask them. Be very clear about what is it that you need to be successful in your job. For you essential workers who might be in a manufacturing environment or be in any kind of facility where you have to be on site, be very clear about what you need from a safety perspective. Be very clear about some of the challenges that you are facing at home and whether or not you're going to be able to make it work and if there's any kind of flexibility that you would need and if the company can accommodate that sort of work. It's very, very clear that you have to think through what these expectations are both ways for it to be successful. You can no longer take things for granted. Think about things like, and Serge mentioned it too, how frequently are you going to check in? What are the conversations that you need to have? How frequent are those deliverables going to need to be? Is it going to be daily? Is it going to be weekly? Is it going to be project-based? Folks who've worked in the field for a long time have figured out some of this cadence. Some of your line workers who might be out on crews working in the field, they might have figured this out as well. Learn from them, listen to them. Another piece that you really have to think about is hourly workers versus exempt. In this new world where you're not looking at your employees on a day-to-day basis, and oh, by the way, please don't use those keyboard monitoring software that does not build trust, which we'll talk about in a second. But if you have hourly workers who are working from home, you still need to follow your FLSA rules. You still need to be very clear that they have the right to a break. They have a right to a lunch. They need to be paid for the work that they're doing. So be very clear about what the expectations are for work on a day-to-day basis. And by the way, you can revisit that over and over. So you've heard from a lot of the other speakers today, so I'm not going to delve into this too much, but relationships are very, very important. People who are working remotely are reporting that the loss of those day-to-day relationships with their coworkers is a big thing that they're missing. They really want to be able to feel like they are connected. And as a manager, you have this opportunity to build a unique relationship with your employees. You are now that conduit to the rest of the team, or to make it okay to build those relationships. It's hard to build this relationship meaningfully online. It really is. Just a personal note, my husband started a new job right when the pandemic started. He has never met his coworkers face to face. He has never been into his office. It's hard to build those relationships when you don't have that one-to-one interaction. So as a manager, you need to really be thinking about things like onboarding. How are you going to get them the materials? How are you going to deliver feedback and performance reviews? How are you going to build trust? But even more importantly, you need to be aware of the mental health side of things. Employees are really dealing with a lot of issues today. There's a lot of stress. We hear reports of increased depression. We have reports of increased anxiety. So as a manager, I think that relationship is going to continue to evolve as managers and employees become more and more comfortable on a personal level appropriately, but become more comfortable on a personal level to be able to build relationships that are meaningful and helpful to both sides. Which brings us to culture. I'm going to be really quick because I'm running out of my 9 minutes, gosh darn it. But on the culture side, I saw a tweet the other day that somebody asked, how do you build a culture without an on-site workforce? And the response was, culture is built with the people in the work, not the place. And I totally agree with that. Managers can be that conduit to the employee of what culture means at that organization. But even more importantly, managers, employees should be able to build the culture themselves that makes the most sense for their team. Now it's going to be more of an individualized, personalized culture. And I'm really, really excited about that aspect of it, because managers should trust their employees, give them that empowerment to build the culture that makes sense to them, still connected to the values and the needs of the organization. But it's no longer just about, is this good for the company? It needs to be about, is this good for the company and its people, and to make sure that the culture that we're building is a healthy one and one that can be sustained regardless of whether or not there's an emergency going on. So I think that was my time, and I might have been a little bit over, but I'm sorry. If you want to connect with me, please stalk me. I love that kind of information and that kind of interaction. But as we finish up here, my pleasure is to announce our final speaker. And pretty much the only thing that I talked to him about is how the heck do I pronounce your last name? And it's Stephen Shedletzky. And he is a brand experience and igniter at Simon Sinek Inc. And you can read his bio, it's on the website. But I just nerded out about the fact, because I love Simon Sinek. So there's lots of really great things that organization is doing. In the brief interaction that Stephen and I got to have before the talk started, it seems like he has a wicked sense of humor. So I cannot wait to hear what he has to talk about. So Stephen, I am just going to kick it on over to you and you can get started.
Amazing. Thank you, Mary. You rock. We're going to have to get you to come in on Saturday. That's a little office space.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. No.
Yeah. Well, I heard someone said about a month into the pandemic, one of their colleagues posted on their Slack board, it's Friday, only 2 more work days until Monday. But as we all embrace this 2D virtual world, boundaries are certainly being challenged. I'm here to talk about not necessarily boundaries or, well, I might talk a bit about that, but I'm here to talk about the infinite game. I've worked with Simon Sinek, our founder, for close to 43 millennial years, also known as 9 human years. And he just came out with the infinite game this past fall, and it's my favorite of Simon's work. You may be familiar with Simon's TED Talk on how great leaders inspire action. His book, Start With Why, Leaders Eat Last. He had a talk on millennials that went a little bit viral. I'm here to talk about the infinite game. How do you win a game that has no end? And though my stuff may be a bit more thinky than some of the others, I hope it kind of wraps it all up with a bow and lends us nicely into our Q&A conversation. According to James Carse, who's a theologian who taught at NYU, he wrote a book in 1986 called Finite and Infinite Games, built upon game theory. Simon read this book about 8 years ago. He loved it, and he started to make connections on finite and infinite games into our lives, our careers, business, and politics. If you're unfamiliar with game theory, here it is on a slide. If you have 2 or more players, as it turns out, you have a game. And there are at least 2 types of games. There are finite games and there are infinite games. Finite games have known players, fixed, agreed upon rules. There is a finish line. There is an end to finite games. And if there's an end to a game, there are winners and losers. Monopoly, ping pong, baseball, chess, all of these things are finite games. Infinite games, of which we are all unwitting players or perhaps witting players, there are known and unknown players. Players can join at any time. They can come and go. The game will go on. Players will enter and exit. There are no fixed rules. You can play the games however you wish, and the rules can change midway through. There is no end to an infinite game, so there are no winners and losers. You cannot win a game that has no end. And because of that, there's only ahead and behind. If you think about it, we're all players in multiple infinite games. As soon as we're born, we are born into an infinite game. Life is an infinite game. Even Charlie Sheen has to admit there's no winner of life. That's silly. There's no winner of relationships. I can't win my marriage or win friendship. There's no winner of a career. There's certainly no winners in business, politics, all of that stuff. You get into an issue if you're playing in an infinite game with a finite mindset. If you're playing in a game that has no winner, but you're trying to win. And if you think about the way most business leaders talk about business, They're actually playing in an infinite game, a game that has known and unknown players, rules that are arbitrary, and metrics of success that are arbitrary, and no finish to that game. They're actually playing it with a finite mindset. They say, be the best, beat the competition, be number one. There are so many organizations who claim to be number one in their industry. I've flown many crappy airlines that claim to be number one in North America or their region. I never took the survey. And let's face it, it's an arbitrary point of time and an arbitrary survey. It's kind of useless. You could say we're number one in our industry. Somebody else says, what industry are you in? I'm also in that industry and I'm also number one. It's silly. The goal is not to win. The goal is to stay in the game and to always get better and better and better. I'll share a little quick example of this. Our founder, Simon, spoke at a Microsoft Education Summit about 9 years ago when Microsoft was being led by Steve Ballmer, who's a finite-minded leader. And he also spoke at an Apple Education Summit some weeks later when Steve Jobs was leading Apple. At the Microsoft Education Summit, 100% of the executives spent, or I would say rather 70 to 80% of the executives who gave presentations spent 70 to 80% of their time speaking about how to beat Apple, where at the Apple Education Summit, 100% of the presenters, the executives spent 100% of their time talking about how to help teachers teach and how to help students learn. One was obsessed with their vision, the other was obsessed with beating their competition, quote, capturing market share. Which one was ahead, which one was in quagmire. So the opportunity is to play in the infinite game of life, of business, with an infinite mindset. The question is, how do you do that? Turns out there are 5 practices. Advance a just cause, build trusting teams, study our worthy rivals, prepare for existential flexibility, and demonstrate the courage to lead. I'll speak about these in brief. And these are practices because they're not a checklist. It's like the practice of staying healthy. You don't just reach health and then stop, you have to maintain. And we know that there are a number of things to get healthy. We have to focus on a healthy diet, our sleep, nurture our relationships, all of these things that we have to do. Exercise, where do we start? Yes, you should start. How will I know when I get there? You just gotta keep going. And let's face it, what makes you healthy at 35 is different than what makes you healthy at 65. The game changes. And so these practices we must maintain. Advance a just cause. We must have a cause bigger than profit. If we wish to lead in an infinite game, we must give our people something that they wish to devote their careers toward, willing to make sacrifices to see something that is advanced. At our organization at Simon Sinek Inc., we have a very clear just cause. We imagine a world different than the one we live in today. We imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up each day feeling inspired, feel safe wherever they are, and end each day fulfilled by the work that they do. Inspired, safe, and fulfilled. And boy, do we need that today more than ever. Safe is one that I'd say is very bolded and underlined for those 2 reasons that Michael shared in terms of both racial inequality and the global pandemic that's going on right now. We need to feel safe. That's a worthwhile just cause. And when our organizations stand for something worthwhile, people on the inside and outside raise their hand and say, I want to be a part of that. This is an organization like Patagonia that so clearly stands for something bigger than profit. They stand for the environment and ensuring that this place that we call home, the earth, stays around, or at least we can stick around for it as long as possible. We are renters, we're not owners. Build trusting teams. We have to create environments in which people feel as though they are safe, feel as though they can raise their hand and share how they're struggling, knowing that the response will be support. We need trust. Study our worthy rivals. We know that there are other players in the game. The number 1 competitor is ourselves. The goal is to be better tomorrow than we were today. There are other players in the game. Who are the ones that we should focus on? It's not about beating the competition. It's about finding all the other players inside our industry or out, finite-minded or infinite-minded, anyone that we pick that when we study them, they make what we do better. That's the goal. I have a friend who leads a religious congregation, and he says to his congregants every year, I hope next year you have a better leader, and I hope that leader is still me. That's the goal. And we can study the people around us to help us improve. Existential flexibility is that you have the capacity, you are constantly preparing your leaders that should you need to make a significant pivot, a significant change in your strategic course to stay in the game, you're willing to do it. This is the difference between Steve Jobs and Apple betting on graphic user interface in 1979 versus what happened at Kodak. Kodak was the company that invented digital photography, and they chose not to pursue it for a finite-minded, fear-based reason, because they didn't want to cannibalize their traditional film sales. And finally, the courage to lead. All of these things are hard to do. Putting a cause ahead of short-term profits and appeasing stakeholders, yikes. Build trusting teams. Why won't people just do their work? I actually have to care about their feelings too. Turns out you do, and it's the most fulfilling work that there is. It's like parenting. It's hard, but it is worthwhile. Worthy rivals, I'd rather just beat my competition. I don't really want to focus on improving and looking at my own weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Nah, thanks. Existential flexibility, our organization is going through one right now. On March 1, at least 80% of our revenues were from hopping on planes and going and doing talks. We had to pivot our business to do as much virtual as we can, but the thing we pivoted on was our just cause. We looked at the world, we looked at the market. What can we do to better bring our cause to life in these new conditions, in these new environments? And one of the things we did is launch our live online classes business. And so good to see some people here today who we've met through those classes. Demonstrate the courage to lead. It's about putting the interests of the group ahead of any one individual interest. I'm gonna leave with one final comment here, a couple more slides. In 1978, Milton Friedman won a Nobel Prize for economics. Seth Godin told me that he actually paid for it. Friedman theorized that the responsibility of business is to maximize profit and shareholder value while staying within the bounds of the law. What about ethics? That is not the responsibility of business. The responsibility of business from our perspective is to, one, advance a purpose, two, protect people inside the organization and in the societies within which you serve. And now that it's a global environment for so many organizations, we have a duty to ensure that we are putting people in situations where they can thrive, both inside and outside the organization and the environments in which we operate. Finally, profit is not a dirty word. We're allowed to generate profit so long as we know that it is the fuel to reinvest back into number one, to advance that crusade, to keep it going, to contribute to our just cause, and to protect our people along the way. None of us here would buy a car simply so we can put fuel in it. That's silly. Then why do we say that the purpose of our company is growth? Unless it's helping to grow people or grow something worthwhile, it can't just be financial. The only thing that grows for growth's sake is cancer. We need to advance a purpose first and foremost, protect people, and then use the profit to reinvest in one and two. This is the book if you want to learn more. As I mentioned, we also have a bunch of live online classes. I'll be teaching one on the Infinite Game on September 9th, if you want to check that out at simonsinek.com. We cannot choose the game. We cannot choose the rules. We can only choose how we play. I hope this little brief talk helps you adopt a more infinite mindset, because our lives and careers are infinite. There's no winning career. If we do it right, though, when we retire or when we pass and someone says, "Why are you so great?" the answer might just be your name, that it was the influence that this person had on me that helped me become the leader that I am. I'm going to pass it back over to Rob, who I know is going to facilitate some Q&A for us now.
Great, Stephen, thank you so much. I invite all of our speakers to pop on the video so we can get engaged in the Q&A. We've had some great questions pop in from the attendees, and I know I was taking wild notes like I was back in school again about everything that's been dropped my way this afternoon. One of the things I love about bringing together a group of practitioners and consultants and people who've been in the field is just the breadth of information and topics that we come across as we go through here. So we're going to get started with some questions that came up from our fantastic group of attendees. Well, actually, first I'm going to start. Mary, have you seen my stapler? That's really the most important question.
I could burn down the building, you know.
You can...
Don't get me started on a quote fest, because
oh my goodness. Kind of okay, we do not have that kind of time. But a question right off the top for Serge, how did you get to work at a place where you're able to activate your motto and mantra to a full extent?
I think it's a really good question. And I think in the sense of, we've all been job seekers, or most of us have been job seekers. And as we get further in our careers and we've gained a lot of knowledge and built credibility, I think it gives us an advantage to look for companies that may match our values. And for me, a lot of the values that were already at the company were already aligned. So I saw it as a perfect fit. But so the best advice I can give is look for companies that really match your morals and values. And it will work out in the long run. Because if you're trying to force some of these issues into some organizations that they're just not ready or they're not willing, you're going to have some challenges. So this is when you're interviewing them as well. Try to ask those questions, try to find out how they work and how they are. So that's my best advice for that.
Great, thanks, Serge. Anyone else have an experience to share of where they have found, I'll quote Simon, and their just cause and aligning their values and their leadership?
I can weigh in. I mean, first of all, I love my job right now, which is, so shout out to Mark. Thanks, Mark. But I think a big part of it is you get to a point in your career where you just know what you are willing to accept and not accept. And so it kind of, you see Serge nodding, because I mean, there just is a point when you start to interview that you're like, this is who I am. This is what I'm looking for. If it doesn't work, let's just stop this right now, but I'm not going to play the game just to get a job. And yes, I know that people have bills and they need to pay them. So pay your bills, take what you need to. But if you're looking for a long-term thing, just be really honest about what it is that you're willing to accept. And no, you will not be 100% aligned all the time with your organization, even as much as you might love it. But just there will come a time where you are comfortable saying, it's not for me, thank you.
Thanks, Mary. You know, accepting, learn to accept for what you're going to accept, or not accept what you don't want to accept anymore. Reminds me of Jackie's talking, and something out to Michael and Jackye, just listening to all of the great points on data. And I know we've been hearing as practitioners about the value of good data for a while now. And it was great to see the shift that Michael and Jackye presented there. So I know we have a lot of hardworking, smart practitioners on the call who are working with these data sets and probably looking to change them. How do we help them make the business case, especially with a tie to empathetic leadership and employee experience that you both talked about?
Well, if you don't mind jumping in to start, is we have the information, so you have to look at the insights and look at it realistically. So an example, I mean, even people who maybe they don't embrace diversity, but they're not illogical, right? I spoke to a company last week. They were a manufacturing company. They manufacture farm equipment in Kansas City, Kansas, and asked me how they could attract more diverse people to their organization. And I, in the Jackye way, said, get out of the manufacturing of agricultural farm equipment business, right? Like at some point you have to look at what's realistic. And if that's the goal, that means you have to be open to relocation. Are you open to people being remote? Are you open to different things? And when you present it back in that way, I will help you with this, but the population in this community is 8% African American, 37% female, 2% speak Spanish. You know, these are the stats that we know of. So this is what the anticipation thinks. And it will help us be better recruiters and practitioners to be able to set realistic goals for ourselves. So many times we're flustered because we want to prove our worth. And we have to start proving our worth, not just by the speed and the people we can get in front of it. It has to be the quality and the ability to make a difference. And so sometimes you have to educate people on what that means.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this may not be popular or not, but I'm a firm believer of sometimes don't ask for permission, just do it, especially if it's the right thing to do. The reality is, I mean, we think about everything that's going on in the world right now. Everyone in this world has something in common. When was the last time you ever remember that, right? COVID is happening to everybody. So it's an opportunity for us to start to speak to leaders on a human level about the impact. Think about how this is impacting you and your family, right? This is happening to all of our employees. We need to do better by them. And if you still don't get the buy-in, there's lots you can do without getting the technology. You can do a lot of really great stuff with Excel, right? So sometimes I especially just feel very strongly right now that this isn't about building a business case. That's not how we should be thinking about people anymore. Right? It's got to be about doing what's right for people, right? Using people analytics to help drive positive outcomes for people, which should help take care of the business as well. But our focus shouldn't be about making money and profit, as Stephen, you stated too.
Great. Thanks, Jackye and Michael. Just going to flip back to Serge just to make sure we capture some of the audience questions here. Question that a lot of people have right now, because unfortunately a lot of people are job hunting right now. I know in Calgary we were having employment issues before the pandemic came by, and now you can see the acceleration in people looking for work and inflation of credentials required for that work. And the question was, as we're shifting data and looking at skills-based hiring, what are your thoughts on resumes? I have a very successful hiring manager that doesn't even look at someone's resume before an interview. She has a recruiter screen for some skills, but not things you can check off from a resume.
Yeah, well, I have my viewpoint, but I also want to be realistic. I'm a strong believer that the resume is, well, I'll start with this. The cover letter, in my opinion, is dead, has been dead for a long time. There's still some professions that need it if you're a writer or a lawyer or anything like that. But if we look at resumes in itself, and looking at the skill-based hiring model, it's really outdated because a lot of hiring managers, unfortunately, look at the resume. Oh, he's only got 4 years experience and I need 6. Where did they come up with that 6 years experience? And no one really knows. And being in the tech sector, I see it all the time that, oh, I need 8 years experience of a technology that's only been around for 6 years. So those type of things do happen. So my personal opinion is the resume is still valid because most hiring managers are still stuck in the old way, and it's our job to really change that mindset. I love that example that hiring manager, and I love that you said successful too, because they're really looking at that skill set and can they actually come in and do the job? Is it not based on their pedigree? So my prediction is the resume will be going away. We're still a long way to go. The HR world doesn't move quick, as we all know. But in reality, as we're looking at changing models to more skill-based, it's going to become less and less relevant. So kudos to that manager. I wish that manager was on my team or of any of the companies, because I think they've got the right mindset.
I'll just add it in here. I mean, one, if you're not going to review a resume, don't ask for it. Just come clean. And plus, LinkedIn profile. I think the other thing, I work closely with a guy by the name of Rich Davini, who's a former Navy SEAL commander. He's coming out with a book in January called The Attributes. And he talks about skills versus attributes. Skills are things like technical skills we can get good at, easier to measure. Attributes are a little bit harder to measure. Serge and I both have empathy, but he might be more empathetic than I am, right? So, and it's harder to teach for attributes. And one of the best ways to test for them is to put someone in an unpredictable environment. And let's face it, many of our interviews are predictable environments. And some people are just really good at interviewing. And so you can hire someone, they seem great in the interview, but they don't fit the culture because they can fake that, and they don't fit what the job needs, because you can fake that too. And so I'm a big believer in how can you create interview experiences that aren't just tell me about a time. How can you get people into an escape room? Because you can't fake that one so long as you're following HR code. So how can you get people into experiences in which their true colors show? And you look at the context of your team. What are the attributes we need to be successful? If it's resilience or moving on your feet, agility, patience, whatever it might be, how can you simulate experiences where you can get a sense of how people respond in uncertain and unpredictable environments? because all of our jobs are uncertain and unpredictable.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. I want to shift the conversation back to some of the leadership pieces we talked about today. Before we get there, we do have a question from Rachel, just on the practical elements. I think, Serge, you're talking about this. What would take place of the resume?
That question is for me, I'm assuming. So what would take place in a resume? I think you just mentioned the LinkedIn profile is already replaced the resume in itself, but the ability to demonstrate your skill set, and we're starting to see a lot of, in my cases, we do a lot of video skill set assessment as well to see actually if they are a fit. We're actually getting a lot of resumes that are video resumes, which are way more engaging, getting a real sense of the personality in some ways. And there is some disadvantages to that. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, I really don't have a clear answer what is going to replace a resume. I think what's going to replace it is how, to your point, and I agree with Stephen, is if you look at how do you measure attributes and how do you bring in people, there's some interesting companies out there that are actually hiring based on the first person applying, and their success rate is actually fairly high. And the other interesting is Google actually did a survey of people that they interviewed and not interviewed, and the success rate was exactly the same. So there is going to be a lot of changes with the resume and how we approach it, but there's not a definite that's going to say this is going to replace a resume. We're still, in my opinion, far from that day.
Yeah, and I think that, so I don't know the answer either, but I do think that we also need to be thinking about how do we modify job descriptions and job postings, right? Right now, they imply that you need to be able to demonstrate all of these things in your experience in your resume. So maybe there's something where we have to start there. Right? What if the job titles themselves are just 3 skills, right? These are the 3 skills we need. Bam, right? As opposed to, BI solutions analyst, right? No, we need, Tableau, SQL, and C++, right? I don't know. I'm just putting it all together. So.
Well, I think part of the challenge too is we haven't really seen the difference between, there's a major difference between a job description and a job advertising, and how we approach it and how we go to market, how we attract people. Job description is what you'll actually be doing on the job on a day-to-day basis. And I agree with your point. When you're advertising a job, similar as to you're advertising a product, you've got to put the key things that you're looking for, but also the reason why they should be working for you in that sense. So I think that's part of the challenge right now.
Yeah, and I want to tie into something that Stephen said about the skills and measuring the skills. The challenge that we're really facing, though, is that we all define skills differently. We have no real way to measure them the same and agree that they're valid for different kinds of environments or jobs or whatever it might be. So skills-based hiring, I think, is definitely the future of where we're going, especially as teams continue to become more and more dynamic, and they almost become like, if you think of a movie and how people work on movies, they bring together people with a skill set and then they disperse again depending on what point they are in the project. And I think businesses are going to start moving that way as well. So what will really help facilitate that movement is finding a way to be able to have a tested skills that come with the candidate no matter where they go. So you own your own accreditation. And then that way, if I'm looking for a skill set, I can look for it.
Thank you for that conversation. It sounds like part of it is a skill set, and part of it is maybe it's time to find a different way than the resume for people to be able to tell their stories of who they are. That's fantastic. Well, do you want to shift the conversation back to those leadership pieces that I certainly was hearing through the piece? And, my experience being an HR strategist and labor negotiator in public health care during a pandemic is it's a great accelerator, and it seems to show a lot of gaps or really uncover those gaps as your cushion disappears from you and you're all alone there up on the spire. And wondering collectively from the panel, like what other gaps that are foundational to address has the pandemic accelerated in your views?
I'm going to say a focus on well-being. We've been talking about it, right? But I do think that, again, we go back to taking care of people, right? That, well-being may have been on, top 10 for a lot of companies, but now that's had to shift much higher up. And thinking about not just from a mental health and physical health like we traditionally do, which is very important, especially with this always on, right? The increase in the number of meetings that we've all had to attend. I mean, that's my whole day, right? But we have to think about the whole person, right? And so emotionally, psychologically, mentally, also the role that the organization itself plays, right? And even in their processes like goal setting or not goal setting, performance reviews or no performance reviews, there are some of those things that we need to feel safe, right? And so I do think that has accelerated the need to start talking about well-being, again, as a must-have and not a nice-to-have.
I would agree with her. Safe spaces. I think what we found, and COVID is only part of it. Like, let's just, for today only, call it 2020, right? We've had killer bees, hurricanes, fires, like literally, I was hosting a day and my dog died like last week, and I found out I had alopecia and my hair fell out. Like, just stuff happening all the way around. And then you realize, because we're all experiencing all these things in multiple ways, people they don't have safe spaces. Like, one day I was like, I'm calling in Black today. There's just too much going on, and there's too much hate against the Black community, because the answer was like, did somebody die in your family of COVID? No. Did anybody get hurt in your family that was Black that got killed by a police officer? No. But you know what? This is exhausting. Just as much as we are seeing before it was major, we need trigger warnings just for Twitter to say, hey, like, you might not want to look at this. And so the gap has been, we need a place where we can rest, but also a safe place to be able to communicate our thoughts and to communicate, because it's coming fast and furious every day. So I think that's a big gap. It's to take it just a little bit further than Michael, it's that, but it's in resource groups. It is creating safe spaces and respecting that difference, the impact, not just the initial piece, but the impact that it can have, respect that it's happening differently, and giving people an opportunity to heal so they can be their best selves, because work is at home now. So we're always there.
I'll just add on top of that.
From a more mundane element, because I 100% agree with Michael and Jackye. There's also the element of, for the longest time, HR used to say, well, we can't do that, whether it was because we can't be flexible with our folks who have to go into the manufacturing floor. We can't possibly allow people to bring their computers home because they're going to steal them, or whatever it might be. And then COVID hit, and then all of a sudden, magically, red tape was cut, and we all managed to find a way to make it work. Keep doing that. I mean, there are things out there that can, I will guarantee you, if you went to your manufacturing employees and said, I just need coverage for these shifts, you guys figure it out, they're going to figure it out. They'll make sure that they're covering the shifts. They'll make sure that somebody can go to their kid's recital or deal with an online class and still get the work done. So just figure out ways to stop throwing up obstacles that don't matter and let it happen. We have proven we can pivot fast. So let's just continue to accept that maybe that's just the way that the work can get done, and stop worrying so much about traditions and policies that don't really make a difference in the day-to-day work.
The only thing I'll add to that is focus on outcomes. I agree with all the points, and I think that goes directly is, if you're looking at the performance of your employees, focus on how they're producing the outcome, not when they're doing it, how they're doing it. I think your point is really good, Mary, is in the sense of, we had all this red tape and we always found a way to say no. Let's find a way to say yes. If it comes to the well-being of our people we work with, the employees, let's find a way to say yes. If we don't want to break any laws or any, but we do want to adapt to the current environment. And I think current environment is just accelerating, to your point, Rob, what the future of work is. So it's got that silver lining for sure.
I'll just throw in here quickly as well. There's a quote: if you put a good person in a bad system, the system always wins. And so I think we need to create systems that work for us and for our people. I believe it's Louis Vuitton that said they only host meetings from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. That's it. That's the only time in any given day you can call a meeting, which I think it's extreme, but it's an interesting system. So, you can only have one major strategy meeting in a day. It has to be between 11 and 1. Good luck, you know. So I think it's an interesting model. You're on mute, Rob.
Check that out on mute. There you go. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for that fantastic insight into that. Certainly quite a leadership challenge in front of us that I think feeds nicely into a lot of Simon's work as well, and a lot of the work that folks here are doing. Cognizant of time, we will wrap the Q&A there. Thank you for everyone who contributed to that. I just want to again thank all of the speakers for giving their time today and everyone who attended on the call. I do want to note again that we have another virtual event set for November 26 for a bit of a passion series and Q&A there as well. And on that note, I will hand it back over to Bill.
Thank you, Rob. So a big thank you to all of our speakers, to Stephen, to Mary, to Serge, to Michael, and to Jackye. Rob, a huge thank you to you. This is the first time that we've done an InnovateWork Rockies event, and it's been awesome. I've been loving it. And Rob's done all the legwork